UK Crime Book Club. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but we are here, and hopefully my camera carries on working. So, Elliot, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about The Next to Die, and congratulations on your debut. It's fantastic. Absolutely loved it.
Thank you, Sam. Hi, I'm Elliot Sweeney. My debut is this book here called The Next to Die. It is I suppose in the realms of hard-boiled detective fiction, but a modern day reinterpretation of that kind of trope. My initial premise was what kind of story would Raymond Chandler have written had he not been a kind of semi-alcoholic chap from the last century, but a mental health nurse in London in the 21st century? What ideas might have come through his head for a novel? And then it just kind of grew legs from there. It's very much influenced by my job. I've worked in mental health for 20 years now, give or take, and so lots of experiences and characters to draw upon. But I really wanted to write detective fiction as well. Yeah.
It's fantastic. It didn't do anything that I expected it to do.
No.
So
Oh,
I don't know what I expected, but that isn't what happened, which is always really lovely when that happens.
yeah.
So just beginning, I mean, before when we recorded the promo,
Mm,
and we talked about the element of bleakness, but there being hope throughout it. And that was
mm,
before I'd finished reading it. So actually, that's exactly what you've achieved. There is so much bleakness. However, it's not a depressing book.
oh, that's good to know.
So even though things are bleak, it's more matter of fact than bleak. Does that make sense?
Mm, mm,
So would you? So Casper, who is,
mm.
you shorten his name. So would you say Kaz or Cass for the shortened version?
Cass or Casper, yeah, he's full surname's Kasperic, which is Polish, so yeah, yeah.
So Cass, great character. You're
Mm,
just immediately drawn to him. I mean, here's this guy who's doing his absolute level best to push everybody away from him,
yeah.
and people just warm to him and give him his space and come back to him. There's so much to cover, and there's so much that we can't talk about because it would spoil things.
Mm,
So it's
mm.
finding a balance where we can really get into who he is and how you created him. And the other characters as well. Tommy was just heartbreakingly beautiful.
Mm, mm,
I absolutely loved his character.
mm.
Um, when you were writing this, how were you feeling sitting down to sit and write these gorgeous people every day? There's some awful people as well. We'll get to
Yeah,
that, but just these beautiful souls that you've written.
yeah, but it's a first person narrative. So I was in this one character's head throughout, and
Mm,
yeah, he's my mate. You know, we get on. I like him. Obviously, he's very different to me. He's an ex-copper, and he's a alpha male, which I'm not. But
me neither.
yeah. But I related to his values, his capacity for warmth, but also his
Mm,
flawed. I'm always drawn to deeply flawed protagonists. I don't like characters who are just good and that's it. It doesn't chime with me. So, in answer, I mean, it wasn't obviously the subject matter is bleak, and you know it's about trauma and abuse and suicide. Those are the sorts of themes that
yeah,
anchor it. But having known so many people over the years who've been affected by these things, I felt driven to speak with some authenticity about
yeah.
these heavy topics, and to sort of that was a real drive. So it wasn't like a process of deliberate self-harm writing this book. It was actually for me almost don't want to get carried away, but it was like creating a bit of order out of chaos really, and to sort of put things down on paper. I've found it quite a cathartic process actually. Yeah. um,
Good. The, where to even begin? just the whole thing. There was a line I wrote down because it really made me laugh, because it was like I felt seen by this line. I stuck out like a hobo who'd stumbled into Fortnum and Mason. Now this is within the first few pages. Cass goes to a gym. He's been given this pass from the lady that he lives with, his landlady, and it really made me laugh, because that's how I feel every time I leave the house. Like, we've talked about this, I have no idea how to dress myself. I just throw things on, but I'm quite comfortable in that. I tend to live in jeans and trainers and not a clue what to do with myself. And Cass is just kind of, he does what I do. He kind of looks himself up and down and thinks, "Meh, all right," and just gets on with it. There's just that comfortableness, that familiarity about him.
Yeah, that's important. I mean, what in all the, because I've sort of just doing the finishes touches to the second installment, and I'm working on book 3 as well. And what
That's
I
so
like,
exciting.
oh, it's great, it's brilliant, and I've taken in different directions. But I like making the protagonist uncomfortable, putting somewhere where they meet people they would not normally meet, be that kind of. So the book 1, he goes into kind of quite a sordid, honey trap gay club scene where he's totally out of his familiar comfort zone, of kind of alpha male boxing clubs and boozes and things, which
Yeah,
is
you are quite
interesting.
mean to him.
Say again. Yeah, no,
You
I'm
are
mean
quite
to
mean.
him. Yeah. But I think that's where the growth lies. You've got to punish your
Absolutely.
protagonist a bit. If it all goes to plan, then where's the growth? Because he needs to grow. He's stuck at the start. He's an ex-copper who's bereaved, and he's not going anywhere. He's got a great deal of anger, inside of him, which needs to come out, and he needs redemption. So that's his quest, even though he doesn't know it quite yet. Yeah. Thanks so much for the compliment. I mean, right, and it is, the humour is really important. I mean, that's what people sometimes miss about writers like Chandler, and people who've been influenced by Chandler. Is, those books are so funny. The some of the metaphors and the similes in those sorts of novels. I go back to Chandler every few months, and I sort of, every time I think, is it going to be as sharp as before? And it always is. It's just funny, and the kind of that sardonic look at the world that the Marlowe character has. And I try, if I could bring a tiny smidgen of that into Casper, I'd be really happy. So yeah, we're probably quite similar in that respect. I've got quite a sort of a, if you heard my inner narrative sometimes, you well, you know what yeah.
I think our inner narratives having a conversation would be something to behold.
Yeah.
We've got quite a few hellos, so hello to everyone. William Shaw,
Oh yeah.
how have we made you laugh? Is that an accidental laugh emoji, or am I just completely forgetting already what we've said? And Tony Millington, evening Tony. Am I right, you did the Curtis Brown course, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I did in 2018. I was one of their scholars. I applied and I was given a scholarship to attend the 3-month writing course, which was, it was an amazing opportunity in so many ways, because well, I wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise. They're not cheap, those courses. But what was unique about that course then, I'm not sure if it's still the case, is that Curtis Brown is it's a talent agency, so they have within the agency a writing school, because I looked at other courses, but other courses at that point tended to be quite sort of separate from the industry, very much about the craft and the art of writing. But this course was about that, but it was also about the commercial aspect. And if you want to write seriously, these are the things that we suggest that you do. So we got to meet agents, and you just get to be around this amazing environment where people take writing seriously. It's not like some little hobby in the back of a public library where people are yawning and falling asleep. It's actually, no, we want to commit time into this, and we're willing to sacrifice things for this. And that was because I don't come from a writing background. I'm dyslexic. I'm I had confidence issues, it's fair to say, and it was just a real game changer. And I met about midway into the course, one of the agents came to just introduce himself to us all. There's this chap called Gordon, who I really liked. I like the fact he represents Bret Easton Ellis, who wrote American Psycho amongst other things, which is a horrible book, but and he gave me his business card, and then I approached him about a year later, and he said he'd be my agent, and that's been brilliant because he was the first person I wanted, and yeah, it's happened quite quickly from there, actually. Yeah, so I'd really recommend it. If you're thinking about doing the course, I would say make the right time for it, because it's immersive, and you need to really have time to sort of put into your work, so that when you share your work with tutors and your peers, you can really make sure you're putting your best foot forward. I wouldn't suggest doing it whilst you're working all the hours and things. Yeah.
William's saying he was laughing at alpha male.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you now, seeing as William's here, and this is not the first time I've told this story, it won't be the last. His books live here above my head. They're always kind of there because I need to really reorganize things. But I absolutely love William Shaw's books. They're some of my favourite things that I've ever read. And thinking about some of them, I get quite emotional. So we'll move on from that. The Bird Watch is one of the best books that's ever been written. It's just beautiful. But I actually got to meet him at a festival last September, and he did not judge me at all, but I jumped up and down and squealed a bit. So how many people have you met? Have you had your kind of fanboy moment yet?
With other well, yeah.
I've had a couple, but William didn't judge me for it at all. Didn't seem to scare him, which is good.
I mean, I went to Harrogate, which was, if you've been to Harrogate, it's the crime festival.
First year's going to be this year. I've booked it.
You've
booked the hotel, so.
Right. Well, I'll see you there. I mean, Harrogate's really overwhelming, and because it's this tent marquee thing they've got outside, and it's quite hot, and everyone's quite drinking in there, and there's all. I just found I was walking around, and I was seeing people that I recognised and wanted to speak to. So I've been in the same room as Michael Connolly. That was quite a big deal. But I mean, most of it's not trying to say morbid. Most of the writers I would jump up and down about are very dead by now. But what I would say is the writing, especially the crime writing community, I've made so many friends in such a short space of time. It's saying something, because someone as sort of misanthropic as me, that's quite a big deal. But I find crime writers are surprisingly sort of generous and unpsychopathic as well. They're really sane people, which you wouldn't.
You get it all out on the page,
expect.
don't we? That's
you get it all out on the page, yeah. So I've made a lot of mates, people I can lean on now and share work with, which is great, and whose writing I really admire, and I've actually got into their writing from meeting them. Through and particularly because we live in the northwest now, that there's a really sort of buoyant crime writing scene up here, which is great.
Kaz has actually asked, so she's asked what's it like doing Crime Central. So February the 16th, you're one of the authors on Crime Central. I don't know if it's been announced yet. I've just realised as I've said that, I don't know if it's been announced, but we're here, and hopefully Rob will forgive me.
Yeah, there's an email that's just come out, so it's
excellent. Okay, phew.
Yeah.
So that's got to be exciting, bit nerve-wracking. How are you feeling about it? And I mean, if you want to tell everybody what that is.
It's Crime Central. It's curated by this amazing chap who lives in Warrington called Rob Parker, who's just one of these guys who can bring people together. And he's a very prolific crime writer too. And he puts on this thing once a month where he has crime writers come and speak to interested readers, I should say, and other writers. So I'm very grateful to be one of his panelists in February with my friend Sam Tobin, he's a Manchester-based crime writer. So that's gonna be great because comes the week after the launch of Next to Die. Yeah.
Yeah, Rob's an absolute legend. He is well known amongst not just crime fiction authors and readers, and he's so lovely and he's so welcoming,
Yeah.
and he just wants to boost crime fiction in the Northwest. I was just going to say crime in the Northwest. That's not what we're doing. Crime fiction in the Northwest, and he's phenomenal at it.
Yeah.
And he's such a genuinely lovely guy
Yeah.
that everyone just wants to support him and help him, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
So you'll have to go sit in front of an audience. It's generally quite a packed room as well.
Yeah. We'll see. I mean, I'm not a natural public speaker, but yeah, you have to be, don't you? And no, I'm really looking forward to it. It's gonna be brilliant.
I think you're doing pretty well.
Yeah. Cheers. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I've not. Some writers, you listen to them or write, and they are just like the Duracell bunny. They've got so many stories and anecdotes, and I'm not. I turn into sort of Frank Spencer sometimes. So yeah, we'll see.
See, now you say Frank Spencer, and I've got images of him on roller skates now.
Oh yeah,
That's it. That's all I can see.
Yeah.
Anyone who's not familiar, some mothers do have them. Go and have a look.
Yeah.
Somebody has asked, and I'll see if I can see. Oh, William, do you think dyslexia made you approach writing in a different way from the rest of us? And are there any pluses in that? That's an interesting question.
That's a very interesting question, isn't it? I mean, it makes you slower. It's made me slower, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. So my writing is quite spare. I like short sentences. I don't like lots of semicolons and commas and things sort of mucking up the page. I mean, I enjoy what Cormac McCarthy says about because his prose is notoriously sort of without speech marks and commas. He says it just looks like loads of dots on the page, and I get that. So my writing is quite spare, and I don't write reams and reams, but I pay attention to the words that I do put down. I mean, it's a bit of a pain though, dyslexia, because you sort of I miss a lot of typos and spellings, which is embarrassing when you're giving your script to a professional, because you just like, oh no. So I will need copy editing is very helpful, a second set of eyes. Yeah.
One of the things I feel like I should say there is authors generally miss their own mistakes.
Yeah.
Because your brain's reading something that it thinks it's written.
Yeah.
So I think you need to give yourself a break about that, because we all do it.
Yeah.
Every single one of us reads something back and thinks, that's fine. There's an example that I use, that there was something that I wrote for the book club, and I'd used the word orchid, sorry, and I must have reread this story 17 times, and the word orchid was still there, and it made sense in the story, but the word I was going for was orchard.
Yeah.
So nobody else that read it picked it up, because the word I'd used made sense in the sentence, but that wasn't what I meant, and changing that one word makes it really different. But I do this for a living, and I still miss things that I've written, because you just don't see it yourself.
Yeah.
I'm sure every writer, who's in the chat would agree with that. You just don't see things that you've written.
Yeah, I'm reassured to hear that, actually. Yeah, and to be honest with you, my editor has said, like, you want to see some of the stuff I get sent from established writers, which is quite nice to me. I wonder if that's the case. Like, the more established and prolific and well-known writer becomes, like the tattier their manuscripts become when they submit it. I hope so. Yeah.
So you'd hope it would improve over time, but as long as the story's there, everything else can be looked at.
Yeah. Yeah.
You really want a powerful story, and you have got a powerful story. You have made me cry.
Oh, wow.
You've really made me. There's so much I can't say. Why don't you talk about Tommy, so that I don't say something I shouldn't, because I could really get into it about him.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's an amalgamation of various, I guess, just patients I've met through my job. I wanted to write what I guess he all does not go well for the character of Tommy, but he's the impetus for Casper to begin his quest, and I wanted to have a because so many crime books begin with a vulnerable woman being chased and then killed, and I really wanted to shy away from that trope because I you know I'm sure it can be done well with originality, but it's just a kind of for a debut writer. I just thought no, that's so I wanted to have a young man who's vulnerable and in trouble, and to have an older man as his kind of protector, I suppose, and that the relation, and they're both troubled people for different reasons, and but I thought that duality would be an interesting thing to explore and to look at kind of men's mental health and how being that sort of pivotal age, sort of 17, 18, 19 in particular, as Tommy is a very tough time. He's traumatized, you know, that there's a history that has become his shadow, and which we discover later. And I felt you know, it was important to do justice to those themes because those are very heavy themes of post-traumatic stress and abuse. But I didn't want it to be, you know, just horrendously just dark because he's hopefully there's humor involved, you know. And I've been belly laughed with some patients over the years who've had, you know, horrendous backstories, but humor can be such a tonic, you know. And some people, if they can make fun of themselves, you know, it does sometimes help, you know, to sort of put things in a sense of context. I'm not sure if I'm making myself very clear, but
You are.
good. So I've tried to do that with the character of Tommy, and you know, he was fun to write, and I will miss him, but yeah, it was yeah, you're right. He was my agent actually. He was like, ramp it up, you know, make him more outrageous, you know, go for it, which I did, and I think it really worked actually.
I would agree. It really did work because you're so drawn to him. He's so endearing, you know, and he's funny, but he's also there's this softer, more innocent side to him as well.
Yeah,
And you've got glimpses of all of the facets of him,
yeah,
you know, and he's just such a wonderful character. Yeah, I really loved Tommy. Leslie asked a question, I believe, and I can't find it now. Kaz wants to know what you like to read now. Did you bring things with you that you had been reading? Did you make a note?
yeah. That great. Thanks for the question. I like I try and alternate my reading between something old and something new, so one and the other. So I'm not just reading the old stuff, but I'm keeping my finger on the pulse. So in terms of recent things, I'm currently reading Rob Parker's latest book, which is called "And Your Enemies Closer," which is good, really
Let's
good.
see if I can do this without knocking my books over.
Yeah, yeah,
I got
yeah.
myself a signed copy.
Blinding, yeah,
So went to the book launch for this, and
yeah,
what a fun night! And he's just lovely, and the support he has is phenomenal.
yeah. And it's like so far it's really good. It's like a multiple viewpoint police procedural, but very up to date kind of themes that it's exploring, and it's very well executed. I read Razorblades Tears recently as well, which
That's on my Kindle. I can't show that one.
no that I think that was
S.A. Cosby.
yeah. I mean that was that's my kind of book. I mean it was kind of almost like Greek tragedy. It was just incredibly moving, propulsive, noir. You know, sort of deep South noir, but in the vein of like James Lee Burke, or even, you know, sort of Faulkner, that kind of full of metaphor and beautiful imagery. However, the themes that he explores of masculinity and sort of shame and sexuality is just done so well. Very sort of present book as well. As I think that's going to be a classic of its time. And in between that, I've just been reading I read The Maltese Falcon again for some reason by Hammett, which I've read so many times, but it's just I like to sort of go back to books I've read and sort of study them, and even if you know what's going to happen, just study the craft and the form and how do they do that. As a writer, it's very interesting. I can't. It's so difficult to imagine that a lot of these writers did their planning and their plotting before the days of computers. Like, I think, how did they do that? They were typing on typewriters or by hand. So, like, how do you edit on a typewriter? That must have been so frustrating to do that. Yeah. What else? I've this book actually I've read recently, which I would really recommend if you've not heard of it. It's called In a Lonely Place by Dorothy B. Hughes, and she's an often overlooked writer from that generation of noir, and it's just a fantastic piece of spare writing, and just the theme and the tone and the atmosphere is beautifully dark without being over the top. Because I'm working on the idea of a kind of a standalone book, which I was writing a couple of years ago, and I'd like to go back to, and it's very much in that theme of neo noir and the tropes that come into that theme of you know from the beginning that this is not going to end well, and you don't know why you know that, but you do know that, and she does that beautifully. Yeah.
One of the things I loved with following Casper through the story, being careful how I word this, there's the duality that you said. There's clearly some unresolved issues for him, and he's thrown almost into this case because he's not a serving police officer anymore. He's kind of an accidental PI.
Yeah.
And he finds, by working through this situation that presents itself to him, you can see him kind of slowly having little bits of himself put back together almost.
Mm-hmm.
That must have been an interesting thing to write, to make sure that he's still, no matter what happens, he's never going to be the person he was before the book and, you know, in his past. But the way that you've done that must have been so painstaking to go through and marry up all these details and decide what to kind of repair and what to leave raw.
Yeah, complete. I mean, yeah, I'm not giving any spoilers away. I mean, so his life has been blighted by the unexplained suicide of his daughter, and I wanted to really do justice to that, you know, because there's no. I'm a parent. I can't think of anything worse as a parent. So I've got, you know, there's no recovery from that really. I can't see how. I mean, I've worked with parents who've lost their children through that particular kind of death, and it just leaves this emptiness that I don't think can ever be filled. So I wanted to do justice to that, and that's how we meet him at the start. But he does have this journey through the book, and at the end, you're right, he decides to become a PI because he was an ex-copper before he lost his daughter. But it was important for me that he was never a senior officer. Like a lot of books have, you know, they're a detective inspector or, you know, a plainclothes whatever, and I wanted, he was always a Bobby. You know, he could never get out of that role because he was too fiery, and even before he had this tragedy, and those sort of flaws have followed him. Yeah.
He never shies away from the fact that there's no coming back from what happened either. He
No.
knows that he is never going to be okay, but he
No.
can be just okay. He
Yeah.
can just kind of get on with things knowing that he's never going to be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right, and I hope that's authentic. I believe it is. How could it be? I mean, he's walked out on his life really after this death. He now rents a room in a retired psychiatrist's loft. He hangs out in his allotment. He drinks too much. He fights too much. He works in a pub. That's who he is. And he's stuck. But at the end, yeah, I mean, he I wanted this to be the origin book, as it were, So at the end, it dawns on him that maybe, I'm not going to say he's becoming like a crime-fighting superhero, but he realizes that he's got a knack for this particular kind of work, doing things that the police might not be able to do. So he breaks rules, he breaks the law, but he also knows people in the police, and that's one of these sort of key features of the classic PI. That they kind of tread that fine line between law and also the murk and the darkness. They will walk down the dark alleyways that the police wouldn't necessarily walk down. They're willing to be mean, but they are not mean, as Chandler said. And that was important. Yeah.
Why did you choose Dr. Steiner for him to live with? So this is, I'll let you explain who she is, but I believe, if I'm remembering it right, and bear in mind this is probably a week ago that I read this, you have her as a chain-smoking lesbian Jew
Yeah.
who is retired,
Yeah.
and she's the most... You can imagine just sitting and having a conversation and just how much you'd get out of that conversation with her.
Yeah.
As he does. He gets a lot out of it, out of
Yeah.
this relationship that's formed.
I just thought what would be the most unlikely pairing, but one that could really suit them both. And I needed him to have a kind of a mentor in his life, like a person who wasn't as afraid to be his mirror and just say, no, that's you're feeling sorry for yourself. You need to do this. And I have met a few. She physically, how I visualize her, she's a bit of a combination of people who I've met who are from London, and there's certain parts of London where you do have sort of quite cantankerous psychotherapists who smoke and give you their opinions even though you've not asked for them. And I thought, yeah, that's I can see her. I know what she looks like. And I can hear her voice, and I just, again, it was my agent said, no, ramp her up, make her more cutting and biting, and so I did, and she's so much fun to write because she just says what she sees. She's too old to worry about what other people might feel, and it's good to have that, because with a character like Dylan Casper who has this shadow, it would be easy to tiptoe around him, but she won't. She tells him exactly what he needs to hear. And for a writer to move the story along, it's helpful to have characters like that, because otherwise you're just in his head. You need somebody to be able to challenge your protagonist, so that's her function, I suppose. Yeah.
And yet, cutting is absolutely a word I'd use to describe Dr. Steiner. But she doesn't mean it in a mean way. She's just being honest. And the cut happens because she hits the nail on the head every time. She's so perceptive.
Yeah.
And she throws questions out that make him really think about himself.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then when he chooses to not necessarily do what she says, he feels it, because she's very wise, and yeah, I mean, but she loves him. They've got an affection for each other, which I really like, because it's an unlikely love that they have for each other. They're two people who would not perhaps have met if had their lives been different. And I thought, this is an interesting relationship. I was thinking, I suppose you know, like the Alfred and Batman, that sort of relationship, even though
Yeah,
she's nothing like Alfred, you know, that older figure who gives you uninvited advice, which you sort of, you know, that's probably correct, but I'm just going to ignore that, you know, and that sort
yeah.
of in the periphery, it's helpful to have in the story as well. Yeah, yeah.
I really like the fact that there is absolutely no chance of romantic feelings between them to muddy the
Oh,
waters.
oh, oh,
And
yeah.
I know that works really well for a lot of authors. And, you know, I've read some brilliant books where um, romance between the main characters is, you know, is can be a key element. But it's
Mm,
really nice to know that that isn't even remotely on the table. That's
no,
not what we're being kind of sidetracked by.
yeah,
So I liked the very definite, not just with them, with all of the characters, you know precisely what their roles are with each other.
yeah.
You know exactly what the relationships are. You know how they're going to interact with each other. You know
Mm,
what will be and what won't be. It's very defined. It feels like you've put a lot of work into making that look effortless.
well, thanks so much. Yeah, I guess I have done that, and I wanted all my. I mean, I just because I'm working on the second one and the third one now. I really like having very strong female characters in my stories. I've found that, and often my male character is actually quite flawed and sometimes quite dim as well.
There are a
But
couple of dim people.
yeah,
Adds
yeah,
to the realism.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
we all
yeah.
have that.
Yeah, yeah, and with certainly with Casper's character as well. You know, I wanted us to create a character where you're rooting for him, but then every now and again he does something you're like, oh, don't do that. You know, I'm not too keen on that. You know, you don't, and that's what some people have said. The feedback, you know, they've not liked him particularly much because you know he does have these problematic sides to his character, which you know rubs people up the wrong way. But that's important to me, you know. Yeah.
That's all part and parcel of his journey. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the word journey, but actually, it's really appropriate
Mm,
because it's showing who he was before, who he's become, where
mm,
he's heading. You can see him changing. You can see the bits that he himself will think, I shouldn't have done that, gone a
yeah.
bit farther, or I should leave now before I do something stupid, or he's well aware of things.
Yeah.
And I really like him. He's got a decent heart.
Yeah. It's
You
got
know,
these.
underneath it all, yeah, he might do stupid things. Who doesn't? But he's a really decent man.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. That line comes from it. Yeah. That's. I'm so glad you got that sense. Yeah. Because thank you. Mm.
How far are you into the next two? Are you early
Yeah.
planning? And what you said you couldn't have gone back to the days of planning pre-computer.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you about that. How do you plan? What kind of
Yeah.
things? What can we steal from you that's useful?
Well, it's just trial and error, really. I've learned because with this book, it was really I didn't I knew the beginning and I knew the end and I didn't really know how to pad it out, so it went through many drafts and then I did that. Lawrence Block, who's an American writer who's done some really good books about the craft of writing. He says that you don't begin at the beginning. So I thought, well, maybe I should, if I move chapter three to chapter one and start there, and then chapter two and three is sort of looking back, would that work? And it's like, oh, it does. Yeah, that's good. So I remember doing that. Um, but it was a really writing this book has been a learning curve for me because I didn't have a kind of a beat chart outline thing that I know a lot of writers
Mm.
do. But I discovered the existence of those things through doing courses and reading books and things. So with the second one, I attempted to do an outline. It was quite a long outline actually of columns of time. You know exactly what's going to happen in each scene, why that's going to happen, how that's helping the plot, and where that falls on the beat chart, which was good. It looked fantastic on paper, and that was about sort of 10,000 words. You know, it was big.
Mm.
but a lot of it was not. I didn't stick to it. I swayed off it, and I've but I couldn't have realised that doing it at the time. It was like I don't know if other writers would agree, but once I start the actual writing process, and I actually realise that character wouldn't do that. Actually, it's not authentic to who they are. It might help the plot get where I need it to go, but it ain't real. And then you have to change it. You have to think of something else. But the one of the difficulties about plotting is if you change something there, that then affects everything else. So you've got to have a little rethink about the future bits. So again, it took quite a long time. I'm hoping I'm learning along the way so that I can get quicker. But it's slow process actually. I mean, I don't understand these writers who just sit down and write and just say, let's see where it goes. I mean, that sounds terrifying to me. But I was listening to Claire McIntosh talking, and she was suggesting this idea of you sort of what's ahead. You've got an idea what's in 3 chapters. It's like driving in the dark on a motorway. You can see what's ahead of you, but you can't see what's too far ahead. And that sounds quite interesting, actually. But with this second book,
okay, I appear to have lost Elliot. Somebody said it is when you are a pantser. So Tony, you're a pantser. We'll wait for Elliot to come back. I would absolutely recommend this book. So The Next to Die debuts Elliot. I'm going to read you the blurb. I'm really wary of giving things away, and there's not a single person watching that I don't think would enjoy it based on all of the similar likes that we have. A young man jumped in front of a train. Everyone said it was suicide, but Dylan Casper knows different because he tried to send Casper a message. And because this has all happened before to him and his dead daughter. But the police won't take the case seriously, so he'll have to go it alone, otherwise someone will be next. Can he stay alive long enough to bring those responsible to justice? So let's see. Elliot's about to come back and join us. Hello.
Hi.
I've just read out the blurb, and I was
Sorry
just going to
about
carry on talking, but I didn't want to take over.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there.
Well, you're back anyway.
Completely forgot what I was saying, but I can't be very important.
So we're talking about the writing courses and the things that you've learned. So what would you say, was there anything that really surprised you that you learned?
In the
So we're
writing
talking about
courses,
planning and different things. Leslie, you'll love it. Leslie's just saying it sounds interesting.
it's just how
really enjoy it.
Everybody has their own way of doing things and their own rhythm. I mean, there was kind of a writer who I met early on who has been a kind of a real support for me. Is this historical writer called Andrew Taylor, and he does that. He will just sit down and start writing, and he doesn't know what's going to happen, and he just trusts his gut instincts. And I mean, I think that's incredible. I just can't imagine that. Because writing a novel, it's such a commitment of time and sacrifice. It's not something that you can just, oh well, I've made, that didn't go anywhere, never mind. If you commit sort of 6 to 12 months to a project, which is how long it would take me to write a book, and then you think that's just rubbish, it's heartbreaking. It's a big loss. So I like, at this stage in my writing process, I like to sort of know what's going to happen. I don't necessarily every single scene, but I do like to know where it's headed, and it's just reassuring to have an outline. But what was interesting writing the second book, book 2 in this series, is I originally, I'm not giving any away, the one of the baddies, because there was a reveal. I got to it and I wrote it and I'm like, this is not good. So it's not working. And then it just occurred to me, why don't I change it? Why don't I make that person the reveal, the villain? I was like, that's interesting. How the hell am I going to do that? But then I just read through it all again, and because that person hadn't been in any way on my mind as the villain, it was all very sort of concealed. And then I've shared it with 1 or 2 people, and they were like, we did not see that coming at all, because neither did I. So it's a weird one. I mean, I would recommend outlining, but I would say don't be too prescriptive to your outline. You know, if it ain't working, allow flexibility and trust your gut instincts as well. Yeah. Mm.
One of the things that I really enjoyed, and I won't go into any specifics, but we know that there's violence in this book. So the fight scenes, now some of them are quite detailed and intricate. How on earth do you plan out a fight scene?
I'm going to sound like such a oddball, but I quite like boxing, and I watch mixed martial
Well, yeah,
arts
the love of boxing
things.
comes across in the story, absolutely.
Yeah. So I study these things, and it's not you know, I guess, just the choreography of fighting, and the sort of the mess of it all. If you it's not like James Bond fights. If you watch like cage fighting, it's a nasty, messy business, and but if you watch where limbs go and things like that, then that's, I guess, that's how I've done it really, and just sort of think about how people move through space. And the language of what that comes into it. Yeah. um, I quite like doing those bits.
That's good. I mean, it comes
Yeah,
across because they're really well written.
right.
And
Thanks.
obviously, I'm not looking and I'm not reading it and thinking, well, that wouldn't work because that arm
Mm,
wouldn't be there and that leg wouldn't
yeah,
be there and you
yeah,
wouldn't be doing that.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
just in the moment of it thinking, oh, that's going to sting a
yeah.
bit, you
The
know?
bits that I struggled with more was the police, the legal side of things. Even though it's not police procedural anyway, there are bits of there are police in it, and I had to fact check one or two things, and I'm touch wood, no sort of ex or serving coppers have got in touch with me saying that wouldn't happen, but there might be possible sort of things, because they're yeah, but, yeah.
One of the questions that we like to ask is, have you ever acted out a scene? So I'm picturing kind of you in your living room thinking, right, I'm Casper,
Mm,
and where's that going and where's that and how would I be moving in that situation? We've
yeah.
had people act out a fight scene on Whitby Pier.
Oh my
That's
God.
one of our authors.
Oh,
Him and his son, Mark Richards, was acting that out. Um, we had Anne Coates hold a knife up to her own neck just to see what it felt like. I mean, you're all a bit mad, but it's a good mad. It's a
yeah,
good kind of mad.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Have I acted? That's well, the kind of the opening scene in the book is the protagonist going to a really swanky health club where he's got these guest passes, and he's totally out of place, as you alluded to earlier. And that's real. I had these guest passes to this incredibly sort of expensive gym in High Street, Kensington, which is a very posh part of London. And I just felt so uncomfortable there.
Mm.
Everyone was sort of wearing yeah, very expensive clothes, and drinking sort of oat lattes, and fanning themselves. And I remember thinking this might be an interesting opening. So that was born from real experience. And in the latter part of the book, there was a scene in a car park, and that car park exists. It's an underground car park in the supermarket, and I remember just walking around there, and the low ceilings and the echo, and the security guard was watching me. But that so I did that sort of research, but it was a lot of it was based on sort of streets that I know and places that I know. I made up one or two areas, but a lot of the shops are real, and certainly the types of shops that I describe in certain parts of London, that's very real. I hope people who know London, it will resonate with them. Yeah.
So is Sally Ann's Milkshake Shack real?
That's based on it's not called that, but it's based on something else that's real, like a 50s themed
Mm.
dinery place where they
You
call it.
ever in Manchester? There's a great one called Grandaddy's Diner,
I think I've
and
been.
it's next door
Yeah.
Institute in Manchester, just near. Have you been?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's great. It's nice, isn't it?
oh, they do a burger called the Blue Cheese Heaven.
Oh, not had that one.
Oh, see, right, okay, we need a plan. We need to go and eat burgers now. I made a note of something else. I've just picked it up because I'm aware that we're running out of time and I have to ask this question, and I'm very sorry, but but I am going to ask. Changing room scene, and I quote, they moisturised, towelled and waxed various appendages. Are people actually doing this? Are people waxing in changing rooms? I realise that's the oddest question I've probably ever asked on camera, but is that a thing?
Yeah. Well, strange things happen in men's changing rooms. Yeah. They're odd places, and especially this again. This is a very sort of swanky gym. Yeah, I believe they do.
It really made me howl laughing because I was like, people stood waxing in public just sounded not the moisturising, not the drying themselves, not even the wandering around naked or half naked. None of that. You expect all of that, but the waxing, that threw me.
Yes, there was how can I put it? I've been in some, not that I hang out in men's changing rooms, but there's a distinct lack of hair in some. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can imagine the lack of hair. I'm trying not to imagine it too much. But it was the actual act of waxing in a changing room. I just thought, okay, is that really happening?
Yeah, I think I perhaps did take a bit of artistic license there, but yeah, you're you're right.
What a question to end on.
Yeah.
Right, let's move on to one final question, which is memorable moments so far for you as an author.
Oh gosh, it's been
I feel like you've had a bit of a whirlwind. There's been a lot happening.
Been a lot happening. I mean, well, I mean, I've been invited to all sorts of amazing places. You know, I was in London on Monday because I guess there's been some interest in the book because of the themes, and so I've written some articles. I was in London for the Sunday Times, and that was having your photograph taken in a studio where there was makeup artists and lighting people and photographers and air kisses, and it's a whole world that I know nothing about, and that's incredible experience. And just I suppose being around writers and being invited onto things like this, Sam, is a huge honor and a privilege. I still can't quite believe it's real, and I'm still got this huge ball of anxiety that it's all going to end soon, because it's as I've learned, writing is a precarious business. There's no guarantees. There's lots of really established, gifted authors out there who struggle still, and it's so I feel very lucky to actually have this opportunity, and I don't want to squander it. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're making the most of everything that you're offered, and the book's terrific. Congratulations! I don't know what words to use to describe it. I still need to write a review, and it's just raw and emotional and powerful and funny and dark and light. There's so much. There's so many aspects, so many facets to it. It's just, I have no idea what I thought it was going to be, but whatever I had in my head, that's not what you've written.
Yeah.
And I just loved it. Absolutely loved it. And congratulations.
Thanks, mates.
And thank you to everyone who has joined in and asked questions. Somebody, let me have a look. Leslie said she's a control freak. She couldn't imagine going with the flow. And like you say, your book is a massive investment in time and energy. Yeah, it absolutely is. And I'm glad that you powered through that. And we've got this to read, to show for your efforts. Thank you so much for coming to join me. It's been really lovely being your first live video interview.
Yeah.
And I look forward to seeing you at Crime Central on the 16th.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Sam. Thanks everyone for putting up with me.